Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for attending our first tour retrospective program of 2021. I'm Jeremy D'Entremont. I'm the producer and host of the U.S. Lighthouse Society's podcast, Lighthearted. And I've lost track of how many of these tour retrospective events we've done, but I know it's over 10. I think it's around a dozen. So I know there's people here who've attended the other ones. Some of you have probably attended all of them. And I know there's number of people here who've been on USLHS tours, and some of you are on the England and Scotland tour we're talking today. At this point, let me introduce Jeff Gales, the Executive Director of the US Lighthouse Society. Hi, Jeff. Are you unmuted, Jeff? Can you...
Hi, sorry about that. Yes, I was muted.
There you go. We don't want you muted.
That's right, no problem. Well, we're feeding Augie some snacks. He's a hound for sugar corn pops, so that's what he's eating right now. So
I don't know if everybody knows who Augie is. Can we see Augie?
Here, Augie, come on, Augie, come here. There you go. All right, here we go.
Whoops.
There's Augie.
He's in a cranky mood today.
Augie, short for Augustine. Skip named him. Skip Sherwood named Augie.
It's perfect.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want to say anything else, Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to say hi to everybody. Thanks for coming. Last year was so crazy, but we're starting off really well. Hopefully everybody's in line to get their vaccinations and we can start traveling again. The first tour of the society scheduled this year in April to South Carolina and Georgia looks like it's going to go. So we're really happy about that. We're still waiting to hear on the international tours, but things are looking up. We had a hard year, but hopefully by the end of this year, things will be semi back to normal. So I'm glad that we're doing this retrospective, and thank you, Jeremy and Skip, for sharing your thoughts with us. And I was on this tour as well. I think a lot of people who are on the call were on the tour. It was a very memorable trip, and as you'll find if you weren't on it, Skip will let you know about that. So hi, everybody, and welcome.
It was extremely memorable. I just want to say I've admitted a few more people, and for those of you who just came in, usually we have people automatically muted as they come in, but I forgot to select that, I think, when I set up the meeting. So if you could all make sure your mics are muted. Later you'll have a chance to ask questions. For now, we need to have everybody's muted except me and Jeff and Skip.
Yeah,
so
Jeremy, there was one other thing I wanted to mention. We're actually talking now about setting up some Zoom meetings to talk about upcoming tours. So instead of it being a retrospective, we're going to start working on this year presentations that talk about what to expect and things you might see on a future trip. So we think that'll be a fun twist on what we've been doing.
Yeah, it's an excellent idea. I just want to say, speaking of what an odd year it was, I'm so glad for Zoom and Skype and telephone, because that's how I did all my interviews for the podcast this year. But I'm looking forward to doing interviews in person again, hopefully in the not too distant future. So today, of course, as I think you all know, we're not discussing Greece. We're discussing the east coasts of England and Scotland that took place in July 2017. The tour was, I believe, 16 days long. It was amazing. I got to be on it. Even if we didn't get to see any lighthouses, it still would have been an amazing tour. We saw so much more castles and museums and many other things. And seeing a few dozen lighthouses was kind of icing on the cake. I would say that Edinburgh is now one of my favorite cities. I came a couple of days early so I could go to Edinburgh Castle and the National Museum of Scotland, among other things. One of my favorite things in Edinburgh was the Camera Obscura and World of Illusions Museum. I don't know if anybody else on the tour went to there, but I thought it was amazing. So if you ever go to Edinburgh, Scotland, go to that museum. I'm not going to take the time to explain it, but it was great. Another one of my favorite things is I got to ride up front in the bus a lot of the time next to the driver because I was giving some historic notes on some of the lighthouses we were visiting. it was pretty amazing to look through that huge windshield at all these little narrow roads and beautiful little towns we were driving through in England and Scotland. It's a little disconcerting, though. I'm not used to being on the wrong side of the road, so that was a little strange when I was right up front. Little scary at times, but the drivers were great. I'm speaking to the choir here, but for anybody who doesn't know, the profits from the tours, the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers support lighthouse preservation and education. And of course, the tours are not just about lighthouses. When you go on the tours, you learn a lot about the culture and communities where the lighthouses are located. So today we're doing kind of a tag team presentation. Skip Sherwood, who led the tour, will talk about the itinerary and about many of the other attractions and about some of the lighthouses. And I'll be filling in some of the history of the major lighthouses during the presentation. Skip and his wife, Mary Lee Sherwood, began volunteering for the Society in 2007 from their home in Fresno, California. In late 2008, they moved to Kingston, Washington to work full-time for the U.S. Lighthouse at the U.S. Lighthouse Society's new headquarters at the Point No Point Light Station. Over the next 8 years, they became known as Team Sherwood as they developed and led 20 USLHS tours around the US and British Isles. Currently, Skip and Mary Lee continue to volunteer. They're the driving force behind the Society's extremely successful Lighthouse Passport Stamp program. They now live in Bonnie Lake, Washington. I interviewed Skip about the Lighthouse Passport program in episode 56 of the Lighthearted podcast. So if you missed it, you might want to check that out. The tour map for this tour was available in the email that was sent out to you. So a lot of you probably already have that. But in a moment here, I'm going to post it in the chat. I'm going to post the link and also the map file itself, and you should be able to access that. So I'll get to that in just a moment as Skip gets started here. So Skip, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us. It's really great to see some of you folks that we haven't seen in a while, and I noticed quite a few people that were actually on this tour in this group, so I'm hoping at the end you can hang around a little bit and reminisce with us if you would. So give me a second here and I'll get my screen share started. So this is the map that Jeremy was talking about, which is on our journal that we get for every one of our tours. This was our patch this particular year. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Is there something cutting off the top up here?
I'm seeing, it doesn't look cut off to me.
Okay, fine. We called this kilts and knickers because of the two places we went. There were 56 lighthouses listed as where we would go, but as usual, we continue to find others along the way, and I would guess that we would probably have been to more like 70 on this particular tour. The tour started in Edinburgh and ended in London, followed the coastline of the North Sea here down to Spurn Point, at which point we went back inland to hit a few of the iconic British landmarks. One of the things that I wanted to do here, which I haven't done before, is to just give you an idea of the kinds of places we stay. For example, in Edinburgh, we stayed at what was called McDonald Holyrood Hotel, which was at the end of the that what do they call it? Miracle Mile. That's not right. The Royal Mile.
Royal Mile.
And
yeah.
the and this was a really nice hotel where we stayed for 4 nights. When we got to Annex, we stayed at the White Swan Hotel, which is a 300-year-old hotel, which was also pretty nice. The Jury's Inn in Newcastle. This is a photo taken from across the Tyne River at the Jury's Inn. When we got to Scarborough, the Esplanade Hotel, which when most of us had rooms on this side here, which overlooked the harbor and the Scarborough Pier Lighthouse. Even the Holiday Inn in Hull was pretty nice, being right next to this marina. When we got to Stratford, of course, we had to stay at the Mercure Stratford Shakespeare Hotel. and ended up at Heathrow Airport at a really nice Radisson. So I was just mentioning to Jeremy before, one of the first tours I went on in Scotland with the group was to the Orkneys and Shetland Islands, and we didn't stay at some of these kind of places up there, primarily because there just weren't any. And someday maybe we could do that tour and give you an idea of where we stayed there. When we started this tour, the very first thing we did was go to the Northern Lighthouse Board, which is the authority for the lighthouses in Scotland and the Isle of Man. And they are currently in charge of 206 lighthouses. These people have been very, very helpful to me personally when I was setting up the trip to the Isle of Man, and have been very helpful in getting us into lighthouses. The gentleman on the right here is Mike Bullock, who is the executive director of this organization, former Commodore in the Royal Navy. Next to him is Ian Duff, who is a former Scottish lighthouse keeper. I don't know who that lady is, but that's Eleanor Dwyer, of course. And we had a good time, a nice presentation here. One of the things that they had in their little break room were these tables. Everybody was trying to figure out how to get one of these and carry it out, because it's a really nifty little coffee table made out of I don't know if that's a real Fresnel lens or they were actually made out of Fresnel lenses, but everybody really wanted one. They were selling some souvenirs and stuff, but they were not selling these. And then Jeff thought that this bathroom was just for him. And they had to explain to him that this, in fact, was the ladies' bathroom and not made just for Jeff Gales. When we started, the first set of lighthouses we went to around the Firth of Forth, which is an estuary of the Forth River. Firth is an estuary. Actually, it's from a Norwegian word that means the same thing as fjord, so you get an idea of what that was like. There are a bunch of islands in this Firth, and that's where these 5 lighthouses right here are placed. And then there were 2 more lighthouses on the North Sea here, marking the entrance to the Firth. This has been a site of a lot of fortifications that were built along here in previous times in the First and Second World War. And as we went down here, we passed an awful lot of these fortifications. The first lighthouse we went to was on the Isle of May, and I'll turn it back to Jeremy here to talk about this marvelous lighthouse site.
Yes. Oh, it was fantastic. And I just want to mention, I don't know if you were going to mention it after I speak, Skip, but there are, I think if I remember right, about 100,000 nesting puffins are close to it on the Isle of May. So that in itself made it pretty amazing, and other birds as well. The name of the Isle of May apparently comes from the Old Norse language. It was a word that meant Gull Island because of all the birds. There's been a navigational light on this island since 1635. It was a very crude light at first with a coal fire on a stone structure. And actually that's the remains of the old light on the left there, you can see in this picture. It was the first permanently manned navigational light in Scotland. It was considered pretty good for its time. 3 men attended the light. It burned 400 tons of coal each year. But a very sad thing happened in January 1791. A keeper, his wife, and 5 of their 6 children died from the coal fumes. An infant daughter was found alive 3 days later. Winds had picked up discarded coal ash and blown it into the rooms where the family lived inside the tower. The present lighthouse, the highlight you see in this picture, was designed by the great engineer Robert Stevenson. There it is on the lower right. Of course, he designed a number of lighthouses, but he's probably best remembered for the Bell Rock Lighthouse. He was the grandfather of the writer, Robert Louis Stevenson. The lighthouse had living space for 3 keepers and their families, had a first-order Fresnel lens installed in 1836, and the lighthouse building was enlarged later in 1886 with the addition of rooms for visiting officials. I think that's the addition you see on the right there. A low light on the Isle of May, you see on the upper left here, was established a few hundred yards from the main light, 1844. They served as a range, the 2 lights, to help ships avoid the dangerous North Car Rock about 6.8 miles to the north. The low light was discontinued when the North Car Lightship began service. This became a family light station, and it was a family light station, I should say, until 1972. After that, the keepers' families lived on shore. It was automated in 1989. Ownership of the island went to the Nature Conservancy Council. Light is now monitored remotely. The thing that struck me most about the highlight is just how beautiful and ornate it is. You know, consider this was built in 1816. At that time here in the U.S., we were building extremely crude stone towers, and they were building a lighthouse that looked like a little castle like this. So,
When the next day we ended up doing a little tour of the Leith waterfront, which is the port in Edinburgh. And I just wanted to show you these lights that we walked to here. And this really shows you what a true wiki will go look at. Especially this one on the lower left here, or the one on the right. This one, we wandered around trying to find it. We didn't even know that was it. But
refrigerator, isn't it?
Yeah, right. And this one here, which had been moved, obviously. But I mean, here's 6 lighthouses, and we get all excited about these things. And guys like our coach drivers always wonder, are you really nuts? Interestingly enough, the one in the top left here today looks like this. That they actually have gone and painted it. And originally, when we were looking for that one, several of us were looking right at it and didn't even realize that was the lighthouse. So these were markers that brought ships into that particular port. There was one other one that we stopped by, which was never a lighthouse, but was used by the Northern Lighthouse Board to test some of their lenses. So it made for an interesting building here that had its own lantern room where they would work on these lenses and the technology. This was called Granton, and it was also the location where the keepers and the supplies went out to the lighthouses that were covered by the Northern Lighthouse Board, and eventually became the point where the pilots for the ship coming into the Firth of Forth were stationed. One of the off lighthouse places we went to was the Royal Yacht Britannia, which, as you can see, was in service between 1954 and 1997. This is the former yacht of Queen Elizabeth II. There's been a royal yacht in place since 1660, but interestingly enough, there isn't one right now. And I suspect, that might be the opulence of these things tends to probably annoy quite a few people, especially in England, who are paying the taxes for it. This particular one traveled more than 1 million miles and is permanently berthed here now in Edinburgh, and is about 300,000 people a year will visit it. Some of the inside look, this is our typical yacht, of course. This is your sitting or your living room, and the little dining room where you have, your closest friends over. One of the fun things they had while you toured it was they had these corgis located in a whole bunch of different places. Of course, there's stuff. And the idea was you were supposed to try to find all of them, and it gave you something to do as you wandered around this huge lot. And then some people found things to do, like pour beer. And here's Bill Wainscott, taking a beer at the bar on the Royal Yacht, and you'll notice the corgi sitting right here. I think this is Peggy, his wife, right here. But Bill always manages to find his way into strange locations. When we went the next day on the Firth of Forth, this was the boat we were on. I wanted to show you these because most of these boats we were on were pretty open in the back. The weather wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. And we'd get rain and mist and kind of get an idea of the type of vessels that we rode around on. The one interesting thing before we get to the lighthouses here, the narrow part of this Firth is at a place called Queensferry, which at one time was how you got from one side to the other. was on a ferry before the bridges were built. The first bridge that was built here, which is now a UNESCO site, is a rail bridge, which is still the largest cantilever bridge in the world. Pretty much spectacular. Never seen anything quite like it. And so this was a real interesting one. And this was built, as it says, back in 1890. Now, there were places upriver here where you could cross the Forth or the river that was narrower, but this is where the main roads were eventually built. And this one here, the second one, wasn't built till 1964, and they called it the Forth Road Bridge, which at that time was the longest suspension bridge outside of the United States. And the third bridge is the most recent one, built and just opened in 2017, called the Queensferry Crossing Bridge. As you can see, that's fairly elaborate also. It's a little under 2 miles long and has the longest 3-tower cable-stayed bridge in the world. And then I pulled this picture off the internet. I didn't take this, but it gives you an idea of what those 3 bridges look like, with the rail bridge back here, the older road bridge, and the newer Queen's Crossing Bridge right here, which is much more elaborate. It's got bus lanes and of course, you know, like diamond lanes and things like that. I guess the other bridge just wasn't adequate enough in order to be able to handle all the traffic. Okay, now we're gonna break this into 3 different little tours that we took. The first one was in the Firth of Forth to Oxcars and Inchkeith, and then to Bass Rock and Fidra, and then we finally left Edinburgh and headed down the coast. Again, this was our boat going from the from Edinburgh. The one that went from North Barrack out to Bass Rock was the Seabird cruise, and Jeremy's going to talk a little more about that. So I'm going to turn it back to Jeremy here, and he's going to talk about all 6 of these lighthouses and the Seabird Center that's located here at North Barrack.
Okay, obviously this is Inchkeith Lighthouse, and we got an excellent view of this from our cruise. Again, like Isle of May, I was just amazed at how beautiful and ornate this lighthouse is. It was built in 1803, which is amazing. It's on top of a fort. You can see some of the remains of the fort. Excuse me, the fort there. The fort was originally built in 1549 when the French occupied the island. And before that, the island was used for a while in the 1400s as an isolated refuge for people with syphilis, among other uses. The lighthouse here replaced an earlier one. This 1803 lighthouse was designed by the engineer Thomas Smith, who was Robert Stephenson's stepfather. And Robert Stephenson actually did a lot of the design work on this. The first Fresnel lens used in Scotland was installed at Inchkeith Lighthouse in 1835. A first order Fresnel lens later used at this lighthouse, as Skip just put up, is on display at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. And I went there, and it's a beautiful display. It's an incredible lens. The light was automated at Inchkeith and destaffed in 1986. It remains an active aid to navigation. This is the Oxcars Lighthouse. Oxcars Bank is a shoal on the south side of the main channel of the Firth. This lighthouse was designed by David and Thomas Stephenson, Robert's sons. It's about 70 feet tall. Excuse me, 70 feet tall. The light is about 50 feet above mean high water. It was built in 1886, and it's a brick tower and a sandstone base. There are 4 stories inside. Living and sleeping levels were in the upper stories. It was staffed for its early years by 2 keepers, and in 1894, it became one of the first lighthouses in Scotland to be converted to automatic gas operation. And I'm just noticing what a great view of the bridges that was in that picture too. I'll just add that the lighthouse today at Oxcars is not managed by the Northern Lighthouse Board. It's managed by Forth Ports, the local authority. Okay. And this is the Scottish Seabird Center from which we took our cruise out to the lighthouses in that area that I'm going to talk about. Scotland has about 112,000 miles of coastline, more than 900 islands. more than 6,500 species of animals and plants. And this center tells about some of that. It's a conservation and education center in North Berwick with exhibits on the local wildlife. There's a telescope there that looks out at Bass Rock, and a very large gift shop that you see there with a very large puffin toy. I think that's a friend that, in that picture too, that I think Skip will tell you about probably shortly.
It's Bosley.
Yes, that's
Our
Bosley.
tour mascot.
A lot of you know Bosley, I think. And also in front of the Seabird Center is a really interesting old structure you see there called the Old Kirk. Kirk is a Scottish word for church. There used to be a chapel on the site starting in the 7th century. North Berwick prospered, and that little chapel eventually grew up into a very impressive church, which was visited by pilgrims from all over Scotland and beyond. And much of the church crumbled into the sea in the 17th century, and all that remains is this structure that was actually a porch, an enclosed porch on the church, and this is preserved as a historic site. And there is the Seabird cruise boat, the Safari Explorer. And we did have a sudden downpour, which was really interesting. But it actually made for dramatic skies of the next couple of lighthouses. But it was interesting to say the least. But luckily, some of us had ponchos. I don't think everybody did. This is Fidra Lighthouse. It's actually a lighthouse I'm using as a background behind me today. The name Fidra is from Old Norse. It refers to the large number of bird feathers on the island. The lighthouse on the island of Fidra was built in 1885, just before the Oxcars Lighthouse. Both of them were designed by David and Thomas Stevenson. Thomas was the father of Robert Louis Stevenson, and it's actually believed that Fidra, this island, was the inspiration for his book Treasure Island. And the island is also mentioned in his novel Catriona or Katrina, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. In 1970, Fidra became the first lighthouse under the management of the Northern Lighthouse Board to be automated, with a submarine cable providing electric power. And this lighthouse is also under the management of Forth Ports today. This is one of the most amazing lighthouses and islands we saw on this tour, and one of the most amazing places I've ever seen in my life, Bass Rock. Bass Rock is not named for the fish. It's an old Gaelic word. The rock was first settled by an early Christian hermit. It was later the site of a castle, and you can see the remains of the castle in front of the lighthouse there. The castle was used as a prison at times in its history. It's kind of hard to believe looking at this thing, but there was enough grass on the island at one time for about 100 sheep to graze. I don't think there's a blade of grass left. There's also a freshwater well, or there was, I don't think it's still there, but a freshwater well on the island. The water was used for the foghorn. You can't see it in this picture, but there is an inactive foghorn on the high part of the island. You can see all these little white dots in this picture. Those are, and the ones flying above the rock, those are gannets, northern gannets. The island is home to, you see different numbers in different places, but I'm going to say approximately 150,000 northern gannets, the world's largest colony of the species. And it's been called one of the wildlife wonders of the world. It was really amazing and extremely noisy, maybe a wee bit smelly, but amazing is the first word I'd say for it. This lighthouse was designed by David Allen Stevenson, David's son, Robert's grandson. There's not going to be a quiz. You don't have to remember all the Stevenson relationships, but of course the Stevensons are probably the greatest family of lighthouse engineers in the history of the world. This light was established in 1902. The island is about 350 feet high. The light, as you see, is not at the top of the island. The light's about 150 feet above the water. The tower is 66 feet high. It was built of stone from the castle and other old buildings on the island. There was a compressed air foghorn on the high part of the island, as I was saying, reached by a steep stairway. And a man from the Northern Lighthouse Board had traveled with us for a couple of days. And Skip, I can't think of his name right now. I don't know if you remember his name. Was it David something? I'm not sure. Well, anyway, this man who traveled with us said he once tried to walk up to the foghorn on those stairs, but he said he gave up because he was knee deep in guano. The foghorn was discontinued years ago because the birds made it impossible to reach. Kerosene was used to fuel this light. It was until it was converted to electricity and automated and unmanned in 1988. It's monitored now remotely from the Northern Lighthouse Board office. And that's just an example. I've got a lot of pictures. I've got a very similar picture to this. A friend of mine who was in this area a year before we were said he looked out at the island and he thought it was snow on the island until the snow started moving around and he realized it was birds. Okay, moving on to Barnes Ness Lighthouse. Barnes Ness was designed by David Allen Stevenson and his brother Charles. It's built of stone from the local quarries. The tower, it's one of the taller lighthouses we saw in this tour, 130 feet tall, 169 steps inside, although we didn't get to climb them. It took 2.5 years to build. The light went into service in 1901. It was staffed by 2 keepers. It was electrified in 1966. It was semi-automated, and they had 1 keeper for a while, and then fully automated in 1986. And then in 2005, it was deactivated and sold into private hands. And the keeper's quarters here are now vacation housing with accommodations. There you go. Accommodations for up to 12 people. That's not a bad price if you have 12 people. It's said that the lighthouse was machine gunned during World War II, but there was no damage. St. Abb's Head Lighthouse is on a bluff. St. Abb's Head is about 300 feet high. The light is 255 feet above the water. There was a signal station here before the lighthouse in 1822. This lighthouse was designed again by David and Thomas Stevenson, established in 1862, and it was used to aid navigation after the lights at Isle of May and Bell Rock had disappeared from view. A fog siren was added, and you can see it on the top left picture. Yep, there you go. Thank you, Skip. A fog signal was established in 1876, and it was actually the first fog siren in Scotland. The station was staffed by 3 keepers for quite a few years. And there's one of them standing there in the lower left. That's Ian Duff. I believe St. Abbs was the first light station where he was stationed. He was a keeper, if I remember, for about 20 years. I interviewed him in one of the episodes of the podcast, and it was one of my favorite episodes. He's just a great guy. He has a lot of good stories. St. Abbs served as the communications control station for the Firth of Forth lighthouses. The keepers had to report the weather. Fog signal was deactivated in 87. The light was automated in 93, but it's still in use, an automated light. The first order Fresnel lens is still in use. One of the buildings here was converted into vacation housing, and the National Trust of Scotland manages the site.
Okay, once we started down the coast, which is here referred to as the Northumberland coastline, I'm going to talk about some of the other things that we saw along here in addition to a few lighthouses, and then turn it back over to Jeremy, who will talk about the lighthouses in the Farne Islands and further a little bit south. The first one we saw up here was the Barrack upon Tweed, which is a pier light at the entrance to the Tweed River. The reason I threw this in here, I remember the bus, because there was a wall built around this city to keep out the the Vikings and whoever else tried to raid these coastlines. And as a result, there was no way we could get the coach anywhere near this particular pier light. So I walked through this town. This happens to be this on the left here, the city hall in that town. And it was a pretty good hike down to where you even overlook this particular lighthouse. And what I do remember is when we went to turn around to walk back, Jeff managed to flag down, I think it was a plumbing van, and managed to, turned it into an Uber and got a bunch of people a ride back to the bus, for which they were very grateful at that particular time. And if you were one of those people, you were one that managed to luck out, I guess. There was another lighthouse here at Bomburg. This is an unmanned lighthouse that was built in 1910 to guide ships along this coast and in and around the waters of the Farne Islands here. The next few things are non-lighthouse, although Grace Darling obviously had a lot to do with lighthouses. But the first place we went was onto an island referred to as a holy island at Lindisfarne, which is linked to the mainland by a causeway that is covered by water except for twice a day. And we obviously got over there when we could get across. Founded in 635 by Saint Aidan and considered to be one of the holiest sites in Anglo-Saxon England. It was a rainy day, and we wandered around the remains of the monastery here. There was a church. This was the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, which nice little church. And there was an interesting pair of obelisks out here that had served as day marks as far back as the early 1800s, guiding ships into the harbor on this island. I found interesting, these are 70-foot obelisks and never were lit until 1990 when they put solar-powered lights, at the top. While it was raining, some of us took refuge in this. It was a gift shop, but one of their main attractions there was the Mead Wine that is made in that area, Lindisfarne Mead Wine. Those of you that are not familiar with Mead Wine, it's known as sometimes as the nectar of the gods. It's alcohol fortified, made with grapes and honey. And fortified meaning that it's got a little more alcohol in it, and some of it has as much as 20% alcohol, which is pretty heavy for a wine. We learned there that for centuries it's been known as an aphrodisiac, and that the term honeymoon is actually derived from a Norwegian custom of having newlyweds drink mead wine every night for the first month of their marriage, in order to increase their fertility and increase their chances for a happy marriage. Hence the word honeymoon, because it was a month would be a moon, and they would drink mead wine, and therefore that's where the honeymoon came from. So you can see what I get interested in, more so than in the ruins of an abbey. I'm over here learning about the mead wine, of course. The next place we went to was the Royal National Lifeboat Institution Museum for Grace Darling, who I'll get to in a second here. But I did want to mention the RNLI because this is an organization that's funded by donations and legacies, and is the primary organization that does the life saving in Scotland. It's manned by volunteers. They have 238 lifeboat stations, 444 lifeboats. Since its beginning in 1834, they've saved over 140,000 lives and have lost 600 of their own crew. I just find it amazing that this still is a charity, as they refer to it, and not an organization like the Coast Guard is in the United States. The museum itself is dedicated to Grace Darling. Those of you that are familiar with lighthouse keepers in the United States, there have been women keepers that have been fairly famous, like Kate Walker, Ida Lewis, and Abby Burgess. But I don't think, from what I read, that anybody has been more famous than this 22-year-old daughter of the lightkeeper at the Longstone Lighthouse. In 1838, she and her father rescued a number of people from a passenger ship that sank not too far away. They weren't really the ones that normally would do this. That would come from the land, but they were on this island, which was closer to where the shipwreck occurred. And she and her father took this 4-man boat and rowed it out there, rescued one set of people, came back to the lighthouse, and then her father and some of those survivors went back and rescued the rest. 9 people survived, 57 people died. The news of her bravery in this sort of spread like wildfire, and it probably came at a time in history when women were not really considered to be you know, this type of individual that would be out there, you know, saving people's lives on the water. She became a national heroine and world celebrity. You know, people painted those portraits of her. She got a lot of money. She got marriage proposals, and it was quite a bit for a 22-year-old that had lived probably most of her life, you know, at a lighthouse or on an island. And unfortunately, she died 4 years later at the age of 26 of tuberculosis. And there is a sleeping effigy of her in the courtyard, in a graveyard near this museum. And you'll notice that she's laying there and she's carrying an oar right here. And in the church that's right there also at St. Eden's Church, there is one of the stained glass windows that has a picture, a stained glass window of her with the word fortitude on the bottom, and again, her with that oar. So I think that, you know, that I've never seen quite so much dedicated to a single individual. And, you know, it was really interesting how she became so famous at a time when there was no Facebook or anything like that. Again, now we are going to go down this Northumberland coastline. This particular vessel right here is the one that took us out to the Farne Islands. Again, you can notice how open it is. We really lucked out because the day before we were scheduled to go out here was really, really rainy. And that's when we went out to the Lindisfarne and the Holy Island. We were able to swap the days so that the next day we were able to go out to Longstone and Inner Farne. And that was a godsend because the day on this particular day was really beautiful. So now go back to Jeremy and let him tell you about these two lighthouses up here, starting with Longstone's.
Okay. I think this is one of the best, one of my favorite lighthouses that I've ever visited. I mean, just look at that thing. It's pretty spectacular. And of course, it was great to see because of the connection to Grace Darling, but I really just love this lighthouse. There were lighthouses in the Farne Islands by 1778. This Longstone Lighthouse was designed by Joseph Nelson, established in 1826. They called it the Outer Farne Lighthouse at first. It was painted red for a long time, and then the white band was added in 1895. Keepers and families at first lived inside the tower here with a living room and kitchen on the first floor and bedrooms above it. That's how it would have been when Grace Darling and her family were there. In 1873, it got a first order Fresnel lens manufactured by Chance Brothers in England. That lens is now on display at a museum in Birmingham. In 1946, double first order bivalve lenses from Chance Brothers were installed, and you see it right there in the upper right. These lenses now have LED lamps, and everything operates on solar power, but just a gorgeous lens setup there. A fog siren was added here in 1876, later upgraded to an even more powerful siren, a compressed air siren, around 1890. In 1942, during World War II, the fog signal building here was destroyed by bombing. An additional keeper's house was built in its place, and the station was automated and destaffed by 1990. It remains active. It's monitored from Trinity House in Essex. This is the Inner Farne Lighthouse on the southern tip of Inner Farne Island, established by Trinity House in 1811. It's a 43-foot tower designed by David Alexander. Originally, it was the Farne High Lighthouse. There was a low light. It doesn't exist anymore, about 500 feet away from this one. The low light was discontinued in 1910 and destroyed eventually. In 1910, at that same time, this light was converted to automatic operation with an acetylene light controlled by a sun valve. It was converted to solar operation in 1996. The Farne Islands are a nature preserve managed by the National Trust, and the lighthouse was transferred to the National Trust in 2005. There's a monastery building on this island that has another memorial to Grace Darling. And Skip might want to say a little bit more about this, but This island, you can't see it in these pictures so much, except you see evidence of it on the rocks there. But this island is just covered with birds, nesting puffins and terns, as you see there. And you have to watch where you step because there are, although areas were roped off, as I remember, but it was so noisy, and because it was so messy, it was hard to find any place to sit down to eat our lunch. I think everybody ate standing up.
Yeah, the one thing that most of us remember when we walked onto this particular island was the attack of the Arctic terns, and turns out these are fairly amazing birds that, as the sign here indicates, that migrate anywhere from 25,000 to 49,000 miles every year. And it says if they live 12 years, that's the equivalent of flying to the moon and back. And they look like beautiful birds here, but basically what happens is that if you're walking on this pathway here and the nesting takes place on the side here, they just end up attacking you. One of the, this is Phil Borkowski here, where the tern looks like he's biting him on the butt. I'm not exactly sure if that's what happened, but we certainly had a lot of what is shown in this little picture right here. And what you would do, you would walk along waving your hand above your head just to keep them from, attacking you or biting you. And I know one or two people actually did get nipped, if they will, on the way. So, I think this is where Alfred Hitchcock, came up with the idea of his movie, The Birds, So, and as Jeremy pointed out, when we got up to the lighthouse where we were supposed to eat lunch, there were benches and picnic tables that were white, but they weren't painted white. And Mary Lee wouldn't even go near them. And it was kind of tough to eat lunch there. Some of the other birds we saw here, the guillemots, were, on the cliffs. The kittiwakes were nesting there. This was a cute picture of, some baby kittiwakes. And of course, like on the Isle of May, there were lots of puffins, and this is always one of the favorite birds of everybody. But this particular island just had so many different ones. I know the folks on the tour that were birders, would like to stay here longer. They hadn't gotten attacked so much. And then one other wildlife we saw was a baby gray seal. This was actually on the island where the Longstone Lighthouse was. And this poor little thing, as we walked by, it was kind of crying, like we thought maybe it was in distress. But as most of us have learned, that, and this could have been because, it could have come in at the high tide and not gotten back. But when we have these out by the lighthouse at North, Point, No Point, we have to warn people, just stay away from them. Mom will be back. But if I remember right, Trinity Tart spent some time trying to mother this particular animal. As I showed at the beginning, we stayed at the White Swan Hotel in Annex. This is a 300-year-old hotel, but its most famous thing is that it has the pieces from the first-class lounge of the SS Olympic, which was in service from 1910 to 1936. This was the sister ship of the Titanic. And so, it made for kind of an interesting place to eat, sort of pretending that you might have been, on the Titanic. Another thing in Annex is the Annex Castle, which is a fairly large castle, home to the 12th Duke of Northumberland, but was built in 1096 after William the Conqueror came into England. It's the second largest inhabited castle in England behind Windsor Castle. And actually the Duke still lives there, but only occupies a portion of it. One of the things I found interesting is since World War II, pieces of the castle have been used by educational institutions from the United States, and most recently a branch campus of St. Cloud University from Minnesota actually operates here. This has gotten to be a very popular place with about 800,000 visitors a year, primarily because of the movies that were filmed here. going back a ways to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and some more recent ones. But of course, the Harry Potter films were the ones that probably garnered the most interest. And this taken from a Harry Potter film where they were teaching, where Madame Hooch was teaching the children how to fly on broomsticks. And today you can actually go and take a lesson on how to fly. But as you can see, things were a little more organized here than they are here. This is not something we partaked in, but fun to watch people try to actually fly on a broomstick. I'm going to go back to a couple of lights here and then let Jeremy do the last two major lights here. At Blythe down here, the Blythe High Lighthouse, which is the one on the left here, was interesting because this was at one time built like right on the water. And right now it's about 100 yards inland from the water. And if you notice the way it's built, it was actually built in 3 sections over the years. The first section, well, obviously when it was originally built, but then as the city kind of grew around it and buildings started blocking the view, they added another section, and then they added a third section, the last section in 1900. It never had a lantern room. The light was shown from these windows here. Not sure where it was down here, but this would have been the first section, the second section, and the third section. And this substantial pier light here at Blythe was built to guide ships into the River Blythe. I'm always amazed at the pier lights in Britain and Scotland and every place else we've traveled over there as being much, much more substantial than most of the pier lights that we have in the United States. So now I'll turn this over to Jeremy again. This is the boat we took to Coquette Island, or however they pronounce it. And as you can see, this is a little more Spartan than some of the other boats we were on. But it was kind of fun. We went out in 2 different groups.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to pronounce this. It seems like French, but it's not. I'm not sure the origin of the word, but I read online that it's pronounced coquette. I don't know. I don't think that's how we were pronouncing it when we were there, but it is pronounced coquette there. This lighthouse was designed by James Walker, established by Trinity House in 1841. It's made of sandstone and 72 feet tall. The keeper's dwelling actually incorporated part of an old monastery. You can see the to the right of the lighthouse there, some of the ruins of the old monastery there. The first keeper here was William Darling, who was Grace's older brother. And it was said that Grace Darling actually fell ill after a boat trip to visit her brother in 1842, which was shortly after this lighthouse was built. And she died not long after that, as Skip mentioned. She was only 26. Her nephew, Robert Darling, was later a keeper here for more than 20 years. The original first order Fresnel lens from here is on display at Suitor Lighthouse. We saw that later. The light was electrified here in 76, automated in 1990. Still active, solar powered in recent years. Okay, there's the lightship there at the marina on the right, and this was a little bit of an unplanned visit, but it was a good one. The LV-50, Trinity House LV-50 was stationed at a dangerous reef called the Seven Stones off the Cornwall coast, which is southwestern England, in the Scilly Isles in 1879. It later served at some other stations until it was decommissioned in 1951. And then the next year after that, it was acquired by the Royal Northumberland Yacht Club, was renovated and reconfigured as a house yacht, and it is open to the public with some limited hours. And Skip, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, we didn't know that we were going to have the opportunity to actually go inside, and we were kind of wandering around the outside. And some people took off to go look at another pier light down the road, and there was some guy working on it, sanding or whatever, and our tour guide started talking to him, and before we knew it, the guy opened the door and said, "Sure, come on in, man." We used the bathrooms and saw the bar and everything. And so it turned into one of those unplanned things that really was nice that we were able to take advantage of. Okay, now before we, you know me, I always I go on these things for the food. So I got to mention the food. And one of the things that I always love about going to England and Scotland are the full Scottish breakfasts, which is shown over here. Now, with the black pudding, and this one didn't have haggis, but Mary Lee looks at this and thinks I'm nuts eating that. But then this is what she had on the lower left down here. This makes the stuff you get at McDonald's and these places look wimpy. I mean, this is a Scottish breakfast sandwich, which has got a lot of what's in up here, with the banger and eggs and mushrooms and the whole 9 yards of it.
But no blood pudding.
But no blood pudding and no haggis, so she was very disappointed with that. And of course, fish and chips is one of the the standbys in England. This we actually got in Scotland and Anstruther, where we were waiting to go out to the Isle of May, and this was supposedly the best fish and chips, voted the best fish and chips in Scotland, and it was amazing. And then of course you can't go to England without eating pasties, and especially with gravy and mushy peas. Some of the dinners were marvelous. Roast pork we had one night, and of course you have to have things like beefsteak pies. Lamb was a big thing, and as you can tell, along with the hotels, we had some very excellent meals. And of course, I can't leave without talking about the beer, and the one beer that this beer here, pronounced Leff or Leffy, depending upon where you're from, was brewed by monks as far back as 1240. And so this one, you had to have one of these just to say why you drank a 900-year-old beer. The John Smith's Extra Smooth beer is the #1 brand of bitter beer, pretty low in alcohol, 3.8%, versus that Mead Wine, remember, is at 20%. So you could drink a lot of these. And then Schehallion's is a very popular craft beer in Scotland. One of my favorite alcohol signs that I saw on this tour was this right here, which was the quote of the week, where I tried to say no to gin, but it's 40% stronger than. Now, anybody that knows me knows that's me. Okay. Going on further south down the Northumberland coastline here, major lights at St. Mary's and Suitor. And I'm going to let Jeremy talk about those now, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of the more minor lights and a little bit about Hadrian's Wall that we visited here.
Okay, as you can see, St. Mary's Lighthouse is very beautiful. And you see the people walking there. It's reached by this causeway that's actually submerged at high tide. So you have to go out there at low tide, as we did. The tower and keeper's quarters here were built in 1898 using 645 blocks of stone and 750,000 bricks. And I believe this is the tallest lighthouse we visited on the tour, 151 feet tall, 137 steps. And this time we did climb those steps. It's on the site of an 11th century monastic chapel, and it's said that the monks here maintained a light before the lighthouse to warn ships of the dangerous rocks. The old first order lens from here was removed when the light was electrified in 1977, was put on display at the Trinity House National Lighthouse Museum. But there is a first order lens in here, and there it is. That was from the decommissioned Wythern Sea Lighthouse, which we're going to see in a little while. St. Mary's Lighthouse was decommissioned in 1984, just 2 years after it was automated. And it is open to the public. There's a small museum there. It was a really pleasant visit, and we didn't rush up those stairs, but it was obviously a nice view from the top, and that lens is pretty impressive. So here's Suitor, one of the really major lights we visited on the tour. The coast in this area is quite dangerous. There are 20 shipwrecks in 1860 alone. The Suitor Light Station is actually on Lizard Point. Suitor Point is a mile to the south, but they named it Suitor to avoid confusion with the Lizard Lighthouse in Cornwall. This is a 77-foot lighthouse designed by engineer James Douglas for Trinity House. Went into service in 1871, and they are celebrating the 150th anniversary this year. And one of my upcoming podcast episodes is going to be all about this. This was the first lighthouse in the world to be designed to use AC electric power. Originally had a third-order rotating Fresnel lens. It had carbon arc lamps, and the light could be seen for 26 miles. The early electricity here was provided by magneto-electric generators. Another innovation was that some of the light was directed to a room called the halfway landing in the tower and directed seaward to warn mariners of dangerous rocks south of Sunderland Harbor. In 1914, a new biform first-order Chance Brothers lens, or lenses that you see there on the left, was installed. This lens system weighs 4.5 tons, floats on 1.5 tons of mercury. The upper lens has a 500-watt lamp. The lower lens has a 3,500-watt lamp. Total of 1,008 glass prisms. This rotation system had to be wound by hand until the 1970s. There's a fog signal, a diaphone horn powered by compressed air, and you see it on the right there. And you're going to hear it after the end of our presentation. I actually have a video recording of that I'm going to play. The light was decommissioned in 88. A radio beacon remained in use until 99, but maintained by the National Trust, and a really good one to visit.
Yeah, this is one of the few places where you can actually walk inside of Fresnel lens, and everybody took advantage of this to get their picture taken inside the lens itself. And this is where we took our group shot. If you're on the tour, we're on the tour and you're here, you can point out, there's Jeremy, there's me. Actually, I'm holding a Pez dispenser. There's Jeff next to his wife. And then, of course, our famed photographer, Phil Borkowski, who we always enjoy watching as he sets everything up, sets the timer, and then hot foots it back to a place in line. And he always makes it. So it's he always manages to get in the picture itself. Let me just talk a little bit about this area around the River Tyne. The Tyne River is a fairly major river on the city of Newcastle, which is the most popular or populous city in northeast England. It developed in the 16th century because of shipbuilding and especially upriver, and a series of lights were put in to guide into this particular river. There were two at the mouth of the river here, a north and a south pier. They referred to these two sides. This is the South Shields part. North Shields is over here. There was a couple of range lights on what was called Fish Key, high and low range light. And then there was another light here at Herd Groin at this particular point, which you can see why that would be there. So we had the pier lights guiding them in here, and then the range lights so that they would know where to make the turn here. Further up the river, we but viewed something that I'd never seen before, which is a lighthouse on a swing bridge. You don't see a whole lot of swing bridges anymore, but the swing bridge was built in 1876 because the previous bridge was too low, and these ships that they were building further upriver couldn't get through there. So they built the swing bridge, which would just swing when they wanted a ship to go through here. The light on top of it, of course, obviously marked the bridge itself. It's no longer operational, but made for kind of an interesting example of a light that been on different places that, maybe we hadn't, seen before. The other bridge that was really interesting here was called the Millennium Bridge, built in 2000, and while it was opened in 2001 to celebrate the millennium. This was right outside of our hotel, and it's actually a tilt bridge because when ships come through here today, mostly just pleasure yachts, they actually have to tilt this bridge. And this is what it looks like when the bridge is tilted. And I didn't ever start it. I was talking to Jeremy a couple of days ago, and he said he actually, could look out his front window of the jury's in there and actually watch this in operation. It took less than 5 minutes for it to go up and come back down. So if you wanted to get to the other side at this particular point, it's a pedestrian bridge. You would have to wait until the bridge went back down before getting across it. But it's commonly referred to as the blinking eye bridge. Some of us took a trip out to Hadrian's Wall. We had a free day in Newcastle, and went and took this trip out to see the famous Hadrian's Wall, which is at the northern frontier of the Roman Empire, built back as early as 122. To be honest with you, I expected to see more than this. I mean, this looks like a farming wall in New England or something. It doesn't. I expected to see something a little more substantial, not maybe as much as the Great Wall or whatever. And of course, we were at this particular time, everybody was talking about Donald Trump building a wall, and people are saying, well, this is probably the wall they'll come up with. But anyway, it turns out that the wall itself was, relatively high when it was built, and was could be as much as 20 feet high. Obviously, what's left is not as much. And that it was a fairly elaborate system of ditches and mounds that they used as a protection against, invaders from the north. Every so often, I think it was every 5 miles, there was a fort, Roman fort, and that's what, at this particular fort here, the one that we visited called Housesteads, were the remains of that fort. Again, talking with Jeremy, the museum they had here was pretty nice because it really depicted things a lot better. Kind of hard to figure out when you see this, what was really there. But they had signage around. And other than the fact it was kind of a crappy day weather-wise, it was interesting, and at least now I can say I've been to Hadrian's Wall. At Roker Pier here, there is the North Sea, the Wear, W-E-A-R, the Wear River dumps into the North Sea here at Sunderland. And for years there have been 2 lights here. The first one that was built here is the one shown here on the left. This is the old Roker Pier light that was built in 1856. They have moved it from the end of the pier because they extended the pier and built a new one at the end. When we were there, we were looking at this thing, trying to figure out why they had, when we see something like this, we always think it's some kind of a day mark, the guide ship somewhere. Turned out they were having an air show. And so this was put up to make sure that the airplanes, because, when you see a white lighthouse like that against a white sky, I think they were afraid that some of those planes which were coming in low wouldn't see that lighthouse. So they put that up as a day mark for an airplane. The other pier light here with its distinctive, stripes, white and red, are actually made from different colors of Aberdeen granite. The thing that was interesting about this one, in the United States, when you have a lightkeeper who has to walk out to these things, we built those catwalks. Here they built a tunnel. So there's actually a tunnel that goes under this particular walkway out to that particular lighthouse. This lighthouse at Seaham was the same way. They had a tunnel that was actually built under it to reach the lighthouse here. This one had the black and white stripes versus the red and white ones, the previous one. And finally, at the Hugh Lighthouse down here, I put this one in because it was interesting. They built this one as early back in the mid 1800s because Seaham or Hugh, or I'm sorry, the city here is actually Hartlepool, and they built this lighthouse again for that harbor there. But they had to tear it down in 1915 because the battery of guns that they put in to protect the coastline during World War I had this particular lighthouse right in line with the battery of those guns. And so they had to take it down. They put it back up, and to make sure that never happened again, they built it out of cast iron so they could dismantle it and then put it back together. I was doing a little research on this Seaham Lighthouse and found this particular picture here that was taken of that lighthouse during a storm. And this particular picture now has become a little famous because of the portrait or the side view of a famous person that people attribute to this. Now just look at it for a second, see if you can figure out who it is. And here it is. So it's actually, they said it looks, you got to use your imagination a little. And of course, I couldn't find a picture that exactly matched this. But look, if you look at the hair and, the way it looks here, it does look like Elvis. Well, I just thought I'd throw in that here. Now we go through a whole series of our major lighthouses. It actually takes to the last, light ship down in Hull. And so I'm going to turn it back over to, wait a minute, got one thing to do here. And that is up here at Whitby, there is a set of pier lights there that we went out on a boat out here to see the Whitby High Light. And the lighthouses, the pier lights again here, and I'm putting these in just because, again, fairly substantial in structure. And then when the pier was lengthened, they added these two and ended up with really 4 lights here, kind of an interesting aggregation of lights at this pier. So I'll turn it back over to Jeremy and let him start going down through this litany of lights that were toward the end of the tour.
Okay, so we did this cruise here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Skip, but it was mainly to see the Whitby High Lighthouse, right?
That was it.
Yeah, that was it. And it was a fairly distant view, although with a good zoom, you could get the picture like you see here. I don't have a lot to say about this lighthouse. It was designed by James Walker, went into service in 1858, 43-foot brick tower, but it's up on this high bluff, so the light is 240 feet above the sea. It's also known as the Whitby South Light. There was a North Light, which no longer exists. It was automated in '92, and the old fog signal building here has overnight accommodations, as well as the keepers' cottages. So there's, I'm not sure how many they can fit in here, but quite an extensive accommodation here. So this is Scarborough Pier, and we stayed at the hotel right at the top of the hill here. And I actually looked out from my hotel window at a view very much like what you see on the top there, but I could see more of the stretch of the beach along on the left. Bless you. So the town of Scarborough here is the largest holiday resort town on the Yorkshire coast. Residents of the town are known as Scarboroughians. I didn't know that. I just found that online. As early as the 4th century, there was a Roman signal station here. Scarborough Fair, I'm sure everybody knows the song. That song comes from the Middle Ages and refers to an old fair in this town, a market fair that started in the 14th century and went on for about 500 years. And by the way, the 4 herbs in the song, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, are the ingredients for a love potion used by witches in medieval times. The Scarborough Spa building here was built around natural spring waters. This water was supposed to cure ailments. And by the mid-1700s, Scarborough became a really major seaside resort and spa town. There's a tramway that runs on tracks from the top of the hill here down to the beach area. I did that. It was very interesting. That goes back to the 1870s, the first cliff railway in Great Britain. And there's a bunch of arcades and amusements. You can see a little bit of it on the top picture, all along the beach here. I noticed that one of the arcades, amusement buildings, was called Coney Island. I like that. The lighthouse itself is on Vincent's Pier, built in the 1700s. There were navigational lights here going back to 1806. There was a brick tower earlier that burned coal, then tallow candles, converted to gas later on. In 1914, during World War I, Scarborough was bombarded by the German Navy. and the last shell hit the lighthouse and left it unstable. The present lighthouse was built in 1931. It's a 49-foot brick tower, new lantern installed in the 80s. Since 1952, the attached keeper's quarters has been used as the headquarters of the Scarborough Yacht Club. The light is still active. It's managed by the Scarborough Borough Council. And that's the view I had. This is the picture I took. I gave you this picture, right, Skip? Yeah. This is from my hotel window, just as the sun was going down. And there's actually an old castle up on the hill there as well, which I don't remember a whole lot about, but it was interesting to see the castle above the town there. This is the Flamborough Lighthouse and the Flamborough Chalk Tower. The first lighthouse at Flamborough was the Chalk Tower you see there, built around 1670, considered one of the oldest lighthouses in Great Britain, but it was never actually lighted. The present lighthouse was built in 1806, 87-foot brick tower, the light 213 feet above the water. The first fog signal here was a cannon near the edge of the cliff. In 1878, explosive rockets replaced the cannon. The rockets were discharged every 10 minutes in foggy weather, later every 5 minutes. An engine house and fog siren replaced the rockets in 1908. I'm amazed that they still had that system as late as 1908. In 1872, Flamborough Head became the first Trinity House lighthouse to use kerosene, or paraffin as they call it in Great Britain. A new rotating Chance Brothers first order Fresnel lens was installed at the same time. In 1925, a larger lantern was installed to accommodate a first order Fresnel lens with 4 asymmetrical panels. We got to see that. We climbed the lighthouse. Light was converted to electricity in 1940, automated in 96, and the East Riding Council of Yorkshire Council, let me try that again. East Riding of Yorkshire Council operates the tours here, while Trinity House still maintains the light itself. And there's the stairs we walked up. Beautiful stairway. A lot of these lighthouses are gorgeous inside. So this is the Wythern Sea Lighthouse, which strangely enough stands in the middle of the town in Wythern Sea, nearly a quarter of a mile from the sea. It seems very odd as you're driving down the road and the lighthouse is right in the middle of this neighborhood. The lighthouse began service in 1894, and at that time there was nothing between the lighthouse and the shore. All these houses were built in as time went on. It was built far inland because of the fear of erosion. It's a 128-foot tower, 144 stairs, and the light was decommissioned in 1972 and opened to the public in 1990. There's a museum in this lighthouse that we got to see. It has historic displays and photos and models, and there's a Kay Kendall memorial to the 1950s film star. I'm a movie buff, but I don't know Kay Kendall, but I guess she was a bigger star in England than she was here. She was born in the town, I guess right near the lighthouse. And this past April, this light at Wythern Sea was turned on for the first time since 1976 to serve as a beacon of hope while the country was in lockdown. And there's the stairs and the tower looking down at the little museum area down there at the bottom. So this is looking out at Spurn Point. Spurn Point is a peninsula between the North Sea and the Humber estuary. And this is a national nature reserve, which means the wildlife and habitats there are highly protected. Spurn Point became a tidal island around 2013, not too long before we were there. There used to be a more substantial road out to the point, and there was actually a community of residents out there. The people who lived there left when the point became an island. Spurn Point was also home to the Humber Pilots, a navigation service that navigated, help guide vessels safely between the sandbanks around there of the Humber estuary. Now they operate from Grimsby. Spurn Point is still home to a RNLI lifeboat station, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. In recent years, the lifeboat crew, I was reading, made friends with a tame fox that they named Basil. Or Basil, I think they pronounce it in England. Now the point can only be reached using a 4-wheel drive vehicle like the Unimog that we took. You're going to see. It's 3.5 miles from the visitor center to Spurn Point. Let me try. My my notes here, I wrote a sentence isn't a sentence. Yeah, it's 3.5 miles from the visitor center to Spurn Point. The Unimog is a customized 1983 ex-military truck, originally used by the Dutch Armed Forces. Carries 16 passengers, so we couldn't go out all at once, but we did all make it out there. Has very large windows, as you can see. I don't know if you call those windows, just an open area. Made it very easy to watch the interesting landscape along the way. The Unimog, besides taking visitors, gets work parties out to work on the lighthouse or whatever they need to do out there. And so we went to the Spurn Point highlight. Let me explain this here. There has been some kind of lighthouse at Spurn Point as early as 1427. In the 1600s, there were high and low lights. And then in 1767, John Smeaton, who's famous for being the designer of the third Eddystone light, designed new high and low lights. The low light washed away after a few years and a new one was built. And that's what you see here on the left. That's the remaining low light survives without its lantern. That one was built in 1852. In 1895, the two lights at that time were replaced by the single lighthouse you see here with the black and white stripes. It's a 128-foot brick tower. Originally had a hyper-radial lens, which is even bigger than a first order lens from Chance Brothers. It was converted to acetylene gas operation in 1957 and then discontinued in 85, and it was restored later by the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and it was open to the public 3 years later. And this was a nice visit. I remember we had some good guides there showing us around. We got to climb this lighthouse.
They had enough food there for 100 people. I don't know what they were thinking to do, how much we were going to eat, but I've never seen a place that brought more food for us.
So the Spurn Lightship is actually in Hull, right? It's in the marina right near the hotel, the Holiday Inn that Skip showed earlier, where we stayed. This was stationed 4.5 miles east of Spurn Point. In 1959, this lightship was driven ashore in the River Hull. This ship was moved inside the river during World War II. Its crew was armed and given gunnery training and instruction in air raid precautions and first aid. The Spurn Lightship returned to its original position after the war and served there until it was replaced in 1959. And it was named Bull for a while. It was painted red and was in the Bull station inside the river there. Decommissioned in 1975, purchased by the Hull City Council, restored as the Spurn Lightship, and became a floating museum at the Hull Marina. And we, as you can see in the lower left there, we got to tour it. It was moved in 2018 ahead of work to install a new footbridge across the A63. And anybody who was on the tour, remember that that was a very busy road and a little hard to cross. They're building a pedestrian bridge, which will allow people to cross that road much easier. And the lightship is going to have a new permanent home and a new marina as part of Yorkshire's Maritime City program.
Once we left Hull, we went back inland, and that was kind of the end of the lighthouses we saw. And the final three stops we made at Stratford-upon-Avon, Oxford, and Windsor Castle. You know, each of these deserves a presentation of their own, and each one is probably one of the most visited, locations in England. And I'm in no way either qualified or able to speak to any extent on any of these. So I would just briefly say, if you ever get the chance, these are places you would probably want to spend some time. I'll just, throw up a few pictures we saw, make a comment or two before we get to the end here. The River Avon, beautiful. We were able to spend some time just wandering around up and down the banks of that. This is Anne Hathaway's cottage, the birthplace of Anne Hathaway, Shakespeare's wife. There's a big area now. The gardens. There's Glenn Tart and Leanne Ditchke. I'm not sure what Glenn's doing here. Probably giving one of his lectures. That maybe he's posing. I don't know. But the gardens were fairly extensive and pretty and nice and beautiful. And then finally, of course, we went to the Shakespeare Center, which is if you are a Shakespeare fan, this is your Mecca. The library, the archives. There were performances going on the grounds, and several people I know, including Jeremy, actually went to a Shakespeare play that evening. We went then next to Oxford University, which I learned a lot here because I never knew this before. But first of all, it's the oldest university in the English-speaking world. Home to 72 Nobel Prize winners. When you get some university in the United States, it's one or two, they get excited. They've had 72. But the thing that I didn't understand or know before was it's actually made up of 39 colleges. And when you go to Oxford, you go to one of these colleges. And then you study, in that particular college. And each college has, buildings that are associated with that college. There's no main campus. And when we were there, you literally were wandering around, the center of the city with all these buildings, surrounding you. And our guide was giving us some help, but there were so many, and the architecture, so amazing that, you just kind of went nuts taking pictures as you were wandering, through here. So, this is the church, the university church, which is obviously at the Divinity College. So depending on what you're studying, you would end up applying to one of these one of these colleges. I got to thinking, God, this place is so huge. There must be like 1 million students here, but they really only have about 20,000 students, and the colleges are anywhere from about 1,000 to maybe 300-400 students. So as a former university professor, I found it an interesting way that a university is put together. And the last place was at Windsor Castle. Of course, the longest occupied castle in the world since the 12th century, when it was built by Henry I. Been used as a fortification, military headquarters, prisons, all kinds of things. You think you've got a large house. This one had 590,000 square feet. Again, we took in the architecture, just so much. And there was, you got tired walking around, and got a chance to see the Queen's Guard go by. Of course, that brought out all the photographers and their cameras. This is the St. George Chapel. This is where the royals get married, if you will. And again, and of course, the last thing you do when you go to a place like this is you go to the royal shops. And so when we got done wandering around, those of us that still could stand up, I didn't. I just went to a bar in here somewhere, but there was a lot of, nice, shops in this particular area. Last chance to spend our money before we ended up at Heathrow. This is David Kershaw, who was our guide, wonder man the whole time. Bob, the bus driver. Dave is just a wonderful coach. Yeah, he kind of was. He kept track of us, took care of us the whole time, and was just a wonderful guy to have as a coach. He's also the one that, instead of again coach, he's also the one that led us through the tour in Brittany. All right, just to finish up here, some candid shots. Our friend Ron Bandock inside that lens, I believe, at Suitor. Here's Ken and Diane in that same lens. And there's, and again, here's Bill Wainscott. He just wandered off onto this golf course while we were waiting for something here and asked the guy if he could practice his putting. This is Glenn and Trinity, his granddaughter, who was on the tour. And what a great addition. A lot of us are old geezers, and having her along just made it, a wonderful trip. She's a wonderful young lady. Peggy Wainscott driving a boat along the way somewhere. Phil and Mary and Ron, there was this cat at Wythern Sea here that everybody, managed to befriend. There's me talking to my people. And this is, trying to gather these people together is a very difficult task. My favorite sign on the whole tour was this sign that said, "Wanted good woman, must be able to clean, cook, sew, dig worms, and clean fish, must have boat and motor. Please send picture of boat and motor." This was actually where the lightship Tyne was that we found this sign. There's Mary Lee with her beer mustache, AJ, Captain. There's Bosley and his friend, the Corgi. We're not sure what's going on here. Jeff will have to explain that one. Here I had a chance to shake hands with Shakespeare. Not sure what Nancy's drinking here, but I'm sure she enjoyed it. This is classic. If you know the Chisholms, they take pictures of everything, and here we caught them taking pictures of their coffee drinks in some restaurant. And there's Trinity saying, "That's all, folks. That's it." Now, to end this thing, Jeremy's going to take over the screen, and he's going to run a short video clip of that foghorn at Suitor, and you have to listen to see what people are saying during this.
Okay, so you're getting out of screen sharing, right? Okay, here we go. I'm gonna go into screen sharing. This is a really brief clip here. Just give me a second. Here we go. And I'm not quite sure what the volume's going to be, but you might not want your volume on your computer turned up all the way. So here we go. This is, again, the foghorn at Suitor Lighthouse.
The dogs are all running around. Glenn's pacemaker stopped.
My heart stopped.
Did you hear me?
Okay.
And of course, they were saying Glenn's pacemaker stopped. And then it was Jeff saying his heart stopped. Because, we knew that was coming, but until, you're standing right next to it, it's pretty much pretty overwhelming.
That was me saying my heart stopped. You could see it was raining, but it was worth standing out in the rain for that. And by the way, I think it was before we were there, but that foghorn was incorporated into a symphony. I forget what it was called exactly, but they had a brass band there playing along with the foghorn. That would have been fun to see. That horn is a diaphone horn that was installed there in 1960, but it's long ago deactivated. They turn it on for special events, like us being there. That was a special event. So we can take questions. I don't know if anybody has a question in the chat, but
I have a question.
Okay, it sounds like, is it okay?
I'm Nancy. No picture, but you don't want to see it. About navigational lights. Now, one of the last lighthouses you showed had the two jetties going out with one red and one green light. And to me, it looked the opposite of what we use here. Ours is always red light returning. And it looked to me like if they were returning through that jetty to the harbor, the green would be on the right where our reds would be.
That's true, and I noticed that, and I tried to find out why it was like that, and it wasn't something we thought about when we were there, but I tried to look it up to see, they drive on the left side of the road, so hell, it could have been just the opposite anyway,
It happens everywhere.
I can't explain that, and I couldn't find anything.
It happens everywhere. You walk into a building, and people will walk in the opposite door that we do.
Wouldn't you think that the boaters all over the world should have the same navigation lights?
Oh, that would be too easy.
Hey, may I contribute to the navigation thing, please?
Okay, who's talking?
Mike Bro.
Hi, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's two sets of colors. The U.S. is section B. We're backwards from the rest of the world. The Europe is section A, and they are green right returning. They are the opposite of us. Most of the North and South America matches the same as the U.S. But Europe, the colors are backwards. So when I teach boating safety classes and navigation classes, one of the mantras that I beat the daylights out of people is to look on your charts to see which is which. Also in Europe, they have a thing called a cardinal mark, and you go north, south, east, or west of the mark based on the way that some cones are on the top of the floating mark.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. I never been there a lot, and that's the first time I never known that.
Very confusing.
Rewrite returning.
Okay. Another.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to mention everybody real quick that a group of us arrived at this tour a little bit early to go see the Museum of Scottish Lighthouses in Fraserburgh. Now, although we don't have any photos or anything of it, if anybody does get a chance to go to this region, you don't want to miss this Lighthouse Museum. It's an amazing museum with lenses and all types of artifacts. And they were so gracious and gave us a behind-the-scenes tour and everything. So if you do happen to be able to get a chance to get up there, let us know, and we could probably get you the same type of preferential treatment. But the Museum of Scottish Lighthouses is worth noting.
I featured that in one of my podcast episodes. Linda McGuigan, you met her when you were there, right? She's the director there. I think she might have just retired or is retiring. And Michael Strachan, who is in charge of collections, I think. I interviewed them. I think it's one of the better podcast episodes. And they kind of gave me a behind-the-scenes tour by carrying an iPad around and showing me some of this stuff. Very nice.
The hotel we stayed at, the little hotel we stayed out there was great, and great food, and it was just a nice little side trip that I would encourage anybody to take.
We can second that.
Okay.
We were there in May of 2019.
Another way, if you have a question, you can digitally raise your hand and we'll call on you, just in case, we don't want a bunch of people unmuting at the same time. But if you click on participants, you should see the option to raise your hand in the window, participants window. And if you click on that, we'll see that your hand is raised and we'll call on you. And you can also use the chat again if you want to ask a question.
Is Trinity? Trinity, are you on this thing?
Hi guys,
Where are you?
right here. I don't know.
We hear you, but we don't see you.
I'm waving.
Do you have your camera on?
I do. Hang on.
What do you remember about this trip, Trinity?
Oh my gosh, it was the most incredible thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Let's see.
Not just the people, but like the lighthouses and everything else. It was oh my gosh, it was such an experience, and I'm so blessed to have met everyone. And it's so great to be able to relive it and see everyone's faces, because I miss you guys so much. And I'm just thankful Grandpa took me and put up with me for that long.
There you go.
Trinity,
well, it's good to see you, dear.
Yeah,
I think
it's good to see you guys too.
I remember, Trinity, you talking to that seal at Longstone and comforting it and saying, "Don't worry, your mom will be back soon."
Yeah, I even named her. I know, I was looking at pictures. I'm like, oh, I remember that. I had some good pictures of her. So I was like, yeah, that's definitely, I remember that. I remember a lot of it. And it's just such sweet memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know about you, but this brings back those memories. As Skip is talking about some of these places, a lot of memories kind of flooded back. It was a great tour.
Yeah, it was.
Jeremy, this is Bill Besdick.
Hi.
I wanted to say, you were talking about lighthouse museums. You must attend the one in Penzance on the southern coast of England. They have a number of first order Fresnel lenses, and they let you go play with them. You could walk inside them. They have hand cranks. You can turn the mechanism, rotate them. You can turn the lights on and off. It's quite an experience at Penzance.
Mm-hmm. Are there pirates in the museum? I've heard of the Pirates of Penzance.
Well, that's a play, a Gilbert and Sullivan play. But
I know,
it's actually a town. It's on the seacoast, and there's a very nice life-saving museum there as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'd love to go there. That's the Trinity House Museum, I believe, in Penzance, or a Trinity House Museum. I think there might be more than one.
Can I say a point about that?
Yes, Keith.
Yeah, that lighthouse, that museum, sadly, is closed a long time ago. It was open when automation was on in around 98, because that, of course, was a base or keepers in that area that's where the support ship went from. When it closed, when that came to an end, they opened it up as a museum. But sadly, when it got around to the end of 2004, Trinity House decided that they couldn't afford to keep it, because although it was a very good museum, of course, it didn't bring anything in financially. And so sadly, it had to close. And then there was a big job of dispersing a lot of the artifacts in there around various other places. And in fact, two things mentioned there. Quite a lot of it went down to Hurst Castle, which some of you may know I'm involved with. I brought that along from nothing to what it is today. And we managed to get a lot of it from there. And also going back to St Mary's Lighthouse, the optic and everything for that was in that Penzance Museum. And that is now actually quite close to the St Mary's Light, in a council yard about 4 miles inland, waiting to be reinstalled in the lighthouse. Now that lighthouse, of course, it didn't want to be, they didn't want to put the optic back up at the top of the lighthouse because there'd be no room for the visitors. So hence the Wythern Sea Light lanterns will stay put. They were going to put it down the base of the tower. And initially there was an optic from a light vessel 21, yes, which is down the Mersey, and I was actually involved in getting that moved down there out of the way. Then they were going to install this optic. Unfortunately, they found under the floor there were the caverns where the big oil tanks were, and it wasn't strong enough to support it. And unfortunately, that's when money ran out. And so at the moment, it's still waiting there. They're hoping to get a lottery cart one day to do the repairs and put it into place. So sadly, the Museum of Penzance, which is a very nice building, is now all turned into flats.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Keith, for filling all that information in. Somebody just asked in the chat, will this be archived to play back? Yes, it will be within a few days. I can't say exactly when, but probably within 2 or 3 days, it'll be on YouTube and the U.S. Lighthouse Society's channel on YouTube, and also on the USLHS website itself. So you will be able to relive the experience or tell people if they want to watch this. And somebody else asked, Marie asked, will you be doing another tour to Scotland and England in the future? Jeff?
Oh, most definitely. There are popular places that we'll definitely go back to. I think Darlene and Tom had their hand raised.
Oh, yeah.
Chisholm, yeah.
Let me, okay. You have to unmute yourself, Darlene. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I was going to point out on the website for the Lighthouse Museum of Scotland, Mike Bullock has got a presentation there very similar to what we had when we first came. What do I want to say?
Yeah.
To the Trinity House, the Northern Lighthouse Board office. And he takes it all around and sees the lighthouses along the way, and it's very, very good. On the Isle of May, the gentleman that somebody talked to about walking up to the foghorn, I believe was probably Roy Thompson, who was with us along with Ian Duff.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Right.
Yeah, that was on Bass Rock, the foghorn on top of the island. Yeah, where it was knee deep in guano trying to get up there.
Sounds like a nice place.
Yeah, that would definitely be Roy Thompson, I know.
Right, he and Ian Duff spent a couple of days with us. So I don't see any other questions in the chat, or I don't see anybody's hands raised at the moment. So speak now or forever hold your peace. If anybody has any more questions before we go.
If you want a little bit of information, when you talked about Ruta Lighthouse and the tunnel under the sea wall, when we had an ALK lighthouse annual general meeting, part of one of the visits there, we all actually walked through that tunnel.
Oh.
You had to have a hard hat on because it was a little bit low, and otherwise you banged your head on the top of the roof. And it was quite a long walk. Yeah.
Wow.
So we actually did it. So I've actually walked through that tunnel.
Great. Wow. You mentioned the ALK, that's the Association of Lighthouse Keepers, and currently Ian Duff, the keeper, you saw a picture of him at St. Amps. He's I believe, the current president of the ALK.
Correction. That is right. That is quite right. Ian Duff is the president of the ALK.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't see any other hands raised. So Skip and/or Jeff, any parting words?
No, thanks everybody for joining us. It's always a lot of fun, and we'll be doing another one hopefully in a couple of weekends.
Let me make one comment, because we're getting emails, and if you were one of the ones that ordered one of the stamps from the Christmas ornament, we received several hundred requests on that. Took a while for us to get them out, but they've all been mailed now. So don't send us any more emails asking, where's my stamp, okay? Except, well, I mean, we got some that are still at the office, evidently, who didn't read the thing that said we had to have them by January 1st, But we're going to honor those, but we're going to have to go back and get them, okay? All right.
Hey, Skip, one thing on the mail. I got a letter from you guys dated November 30th, and it arrived yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
Did it go to Scotland first?
I do not know, but the mail has been really, really slow.
That's true. So even if they were mailed last week, it could be could be February or March before you get your stamp. Okay.
Right. So yeah.
Thanks for letting me know. Jeremy,
yeah.
Could I just ask anybody who was on this tour that wants to just stick around for a few minutes to just say, hey, could we do that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to include you too, Jeff.
Well, I can't. I have to sign off, everybody. I have something else to go to here, but it was nice seeing everybody, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Jeff. See you soon.
Bye. Hold on.
Bye.
Bye, Jeff. So I guess we're going to say good evening, good day, depending on where you are, and except for the people who are on the tour are going to stick around for a few minutes. So thank you all so much. We'll be seeing you again with more of these presentations. And I love the idea that we're going to talk about upcoming tours as well. So watch for those. So thank you and take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.